I'm going to share with you a story about how I won another government contract working for the small government contractor that I worked for. This contract was for a heavy equipment lease and rental, and this was for the Army Corps of Engineers out of the Detroit district. And this contract ended up being just under $1 million. So any of you who are, subscribed to the channel, new subscribers, welcome. Many of you know my story about my road salt contract. So today I'm going to share another story about another contract that I won. But that contract was a sole source, single source contract where nobody could provide that road salt. But this contract and this story was actually competed. Okay, so this is something that I had to fight for and win, and I did. And for those of you who know my story, just for a little bit of perspective, this contract was actually won the spring of the following year that I won the road salt contract. So I did win contracts in between. But this is a particular story that I felt like unpacking for you right now because, stick around to the end of the story because there's a few lessons that, hard lessons we had to learn. And this also is just, a bit of an inspiring story as we're in the fourth quarter that I wanted to share with you now. So by this time in my journey and in my story, I had gotten pretty savvy, I would say, at using FBO Fed BizOps. I had a lot of searches set up, feeding me, daily opportunities, things to go through. And I had particular searches set up for local offices. So, take home, the Detroit Arsenal is big in Michigan. There's multiple VA medical centers. There's National Guard, Air National Guard, and there's also the Army Corps of Engineers. So because I was following the Army Corps of Engineers, one day I basically saw this solicitation come out as RFQ, and it was for heavy equipment and rental lease of this heavy equipment like dozers, dump trucks, excavators, hydraulic lifts, things like that. A lot of things that, I'm not a construction person per se, so I didn't even know what some of the equipment was. These, hydraulic claws that act as extensions on an excavator that we had to give them. Lots of, interesting stuff to say the least. But I was still, pretty new, pretty green, and, still wanting to prove myself. And I'm like, well, we've done all this. Why can't we do this? Again, this was a woman-owned small business set-aside contract. And we were a woman-owned small business certified small business. So we were able to perform on this. So just because it was something like heavy equipment rental and lease, that wasn't enough to hold me back from going after it and pursuing it. So because this was a request for quote, this is going to be largely based on pricing. So I ended up reaching out to some local distributors, suppliers like Komatsu, Caterpillar. I think John Deere was in there. I'm not 100%. I know we didn't end up going with them. And I started getting quotes, so the government in the RFQ, they had these pricing CLINs and, they had the proposed specs that the equipment needed to meet in terms of like weight distribution and all these different, things that an engineer has probably, outlined, within the government to give to us, a contractor, to make sure that the equipment is going to meet these specs. Well, I didn't know what that stuff meant either. So I had to give it to the supplier and say, give me quotes. What you quote me, what equipment you're going to propose has to meet these specs within the scope of work that the government is requiring us to do. And then I need a price off of that, not only for, 1 month, but this was, base months. So not option years, but option months, because this was the spring. The contract was to go into place, I believe, in May. Frost laws were a very big thing because the work was to be performed. I don't know if it was a quarry or what, like up in the Sioux, up in the UP in Michigan, and things, get colder there faster, and they also get warmer slower. So, we couldn't move this heavy equipment up there when the frost laws say you can't drive a certain amount of pounds on the road until basically things have warmed up enough. Otherwise, it's going to damage the road. But all just to say, this was for May. But then they were going to have option months where they're going to, execute June, July, August. And then if they could, they would go into September. So long story short, I got quotes, Caterpillar and Komatsu, they were not able to quote 100%. So basically it was like a hodgepodge of they're going to provide some of the equipment and they're going to provide the rest of it. And, we were also able to propose equivalents. So there were a couple pieces of equipment that they were not able to provide because it was already rented out and they just didn't have any more equipment available for those time ranges. So they proposed, other equivalents for that. So I submitted that to the government. It ended up being just under $1 million. I remember 950,000 or 980 or something like that. And then the same week I submitted, I got a call from a contracting officer the contracting officer on it, saying, hey, can we talk? We need to talk about your submission. And just a side note, guys, if you get a call from contracting and they need to talk to you, that means you have piqued their interest at the very least. And they need to make sure that if this is real, like, did you, look at this properly? Did you miss anything? This was a LPTA contract, so lowest price. So the fact that they were talking to us kind of let me know already that, hey, we're probably the lowest bidder on this. They just want to make sure that we, can basically provide what we're saying we can provide. So we had the phone call. My boss was in on this. We had the video teleconferencing equipment going, the big speaker. They had some engineers. They had the core. There was 4 or 5 of them. There was 2 of us. And we were kind of fielding their questions. What I had to do was I had to take the technical manuals for the equipment that the suppliers had given me and include that as part of our proposal packet submission. This, because I don't know this stuff and the government doesn't expect us to, but, all the specs are provided by the suppliers. So, that was part of a proposal. So they wanted to go through some of that. And like I said, we did propose a few equivalents. So that means, it wasn't the exact equipment that they had, recommended, because it was not available. So we did the best we can. Well, one of the pieces of equipment they ended up, that was a alternate, they ended up saying okay to. But the other one, they said no. They said, this is smaller than what we need. You need to come back to me today with a piece of equipment that's going to meet or exceed our requirements for this. So, knowing me, like, what else could I do? I turned to my boss and let me get on the phone, right? So I called around and ended up, going through kind of a big circle, ended up coming back to Komatsu and Caterpillar. And I believe it was Komatsu that actually provided this. So it was actually more than what they needed, because the only option was less, and they let us know that was not meeting their needs. So we provided something, bigger and greater than what they wanted, but that was going to increase our price because it's more equipment. We didn't want to do that. So what did we do? This is one of the lessons I'm going to talk about at the end. Well, what we did was we took that pricing CLIN for a slight loss. So because we had all these other pricing CLINs where we're making all this profit, or, we're making the profit margin that we had set in to be lowest, price technically acceptable, we thought it was going to be fine to basically propose this alternate with a slight loss for this particular pricing CLIN if it meant giving the government what they wanted. Overall, the contract would still be a win. And sometimes, guys, you've got to get creative. If you want to win, you got to make the numbers work. Everything's not going to be black and white, cut and dry. You've got to make things work. So I emailed the new manual, the new spec to the government. We got back on a phone call, and of course they were happy because this exceeded their expectations for this specific piece of equipment. They were happy. They said, you can provide us that. And we said, yeah. The supplier said they're good to go. And we won the contract as a woman-owned small business, set aside small business contract that was competed. So now here's a couple things that I want you to know and kind of take away from this story. Okay, the story is not over here. Don't click off. It's just getting good. So the first thing that you need to know what happened was that pricing CLIN that we just took a slight loss on, we were okay with it because it was only for like 2 months. And then the rest of the equipment they were going to use for, 3 or 4 months. So again, we're making even more money back than the slight loss on this pricing CLIN. Well, what did the government end up doing? They ended up extending the CLIN for the loss. That was bad, right? Like that's a big no-no. That was not a good conversation with my boss. Like, what happened? How did we price this out? And then we realized, like, oh yeah, like we weren't planning on them going beyond 2 months for this particular CLIN, but they said, hey, we need it longer. What are you going to do? Tell them? You can't tell them no. Like, they're going to keep executing it. So this ended up turning our slight loss on that CLIN to more of a medium-sized loss, which then is basically offsetting some of these good pricing CLINs for the other equipment, dump trucks, dozers, what have you, that we are making money on. Every month they lease it out, we're making money. Well, now this is starting to offset that, and things start to get a little scary. Again, like, who would have ever thought that would have happened? Like, you have this kind of rosy picture and everything looks fine, but then, circumstances happen. So time goes on, the summer rolls through, they're still leasing the good equipment, the profitable equipment, and it's still compensating for this particular piece of equipment, so everything is fine. And then, the frost laws get close and the contract ends. And then the second thing happens. The second thing is now a lot of the equipment is damaged. So remember, this is just an equipment lease and rental. We were not providing people. This was not a service contract. It was just a rental. So it was the government employees, these knuckleheads that were using the equipment up in the Sioux, probably being reckless with it, in addition to wear and tear. We don't know for sure, like normal wear and tear is going to happen. But, a rock fell and it bashed in the window. I mean, this stuff, it's dangerous. Like, it's so dangerous. Big scrapes on the machinery. Some of the tires were out. Things like that. And, they want to give us the equipment. Now what do? You turn to Komatsu and Caterpillar and say, here's your equipment back. I don't think so. That will put your company out of business if they have to replace millions of dollars in machinery that they leased from us. Because remember, the contract was for just under $1 million, but how much do you think that machinery cost? I mean, we're talking quantities. This isn't one of each. So at first we thought we were in a little uncomfortable water because they extended a slightly losing pricing claim. And then when the government employees damaged the equipment without us even knowing about it when it happened, it's like, why didn't you tell us? We went from being uncomfortable to being like in hot water. Like, this is all we focused on. We dropped everything we were doing. Kind of long story short, we were able to get what's called an REA, and REAs aren't even necessarily fit for this situation. I don't know how we got it, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. It would suck out all of the profit we were making on this contract. This contract would be a total loss against the company. Now it's not just a pricing claim, but the whole contract itself. This is how you put companies out of business. So basically, we didn't know at the time, just as I was winning these contracts and it was new, and it was kind of reckless at the time, looking back at it. And that's why I want to share these lessons with you. But we hired a contracts attorney. They basically educated us on this idea of an REA, a request for equitable adjustment, basically saying, if something happens outside of the contract that causes undue harm on the contractor, contracting can put additional pricing on the contract. And that's actually what ended up happening. Luckily for us, the supplier actually ended up quoting out the damages. They actually had able to do the repairs, so they quoted it themselves. They probably marked it up to some insane number. I don't know what it actually took to repair, but we got an REA for those funds. That way we did not have to take that huge loss on the contract. But kind of the story here is, every contract you take, there's a certain risk associated with it. And, like, we had never been through something like that, but we learned it and we're wiser because of it. We learned about, that's how we first learned about this REA process, which, you can't count on, you can't bake on. And learning more about it, it really wasn't even the best fit for the situation. So we got super lucky that we were able to do that, because imagine what would happen, if we didn't. But, this was another contract that I won. It was just under $1 million. We still ended up making a good amount of profit on the contract. We performed. We built our past performance using this type of contract to go after other contracts with. We didn't end up doing a whole lot in this type of space because after this we were kind of like once bitten, twice shy. My boss really didn't want to jump into the wagon to go after more heavy equipment. And I don't blame her at all. So I wanted to show you a few things in this story. I wanted to show you a competed contract instead of a sole source like we did in the road salt. I also wanted to let you know, that it's possible. You can win. And sometimes contracting will enter into negotiations with you. And sometimes you have to be creative. But then also that there are these risks that are associated with contracts that you have to be very careful, which is why you don't need to just run out and do this. That's why this is not get rich quick. This is why I recommend the business that you're getting into, the contracts that you're trying to pursue first. That way you're more knowledgeable. Don't go through the mistakes that we made. Just try to win anything that you can. Because, it wasn't my company. I worked for a contractor. This was not my business. She carried all the risk, not me. I just knew I was going to get paid a commission on it. So I wanted to go out and hunt everything that I could. And I did, and I got very good at it. But I've learned a lot of things in the process, which is why, I want you guys to be careful if you're listening to other people in other places or on YouTube that are telling you to run out and go and do these things, or just go out and get A&A, or just go out and get, whatever. It can be very dangerous. There are risks associated. In this one, we got very lucky. So take some learning lessons from this story. I hope it helps you, but I also hope it inspires you that if you're somebody who knows your business, that there is a lot of opportunity with U.S. federal agencies to win government contracts with. So I hope this story has helped you in some way, and I will see you in my next video.